Good everyone. How are you all doing? I hope you're having a good day. We are having an completely overcast day, not raining yet. Probably will start raining. So anyway, we're looking at the story of Mary in the scriptures. And interestingly, it does not say a lot about Mary in the scriptures. Obviously, in the Christmas story, in the account of the birth of Jesus, Mary appears quite a bit. But interestingly, after that, she dwindles off quickly, really fast. So, yesterday we looked at the story of when Mary and Joseph had traveled all the way down to Jerusalem, as was their yearly habit during an important feast time. It's about a 3 day, maybe 4 day, depending on how fast or slow you walk, journey. Um, and when they were walking home, they lost track of Jesus. And I don't know if I made it clear. I was trying to remember. But the reason they lost track of Jesus because they would have been traveling for safety reasons and also because just the culture they were, they were an extended family culture. So a lot of family members would have all been traveling together. And because of that, parents didn't always keep track of their own kids all day long. They just assumed auntie or an uncle or a granny or somebody was watching after them. And so that's how you get to be a day or more away from Jerusalem before Mary and Joseph, excuse me, before Mary and Joseph discover that Jesus is not with them. And I was laughing to myself on the drive in today, thinking, Mary, and Joseph, you had one job to do, and that's to raise the Son of God, and you lost him. You lost track of him. But I'm not being critical. I actually lost our kids twice when they were growing up, and I remember what that was like. But anyway, it all worked out, and Mary learned a little bit more. Joseph learned a little bit more about who this Jesus is that God entrusted them to raise. Then the scriptures go silent. And we go all the way from 12-year-old Jesus all the way to basically 30-year-old Jesus before Jesus appears back on the scene and Mary shortly after appears back on the scene. And after this, Mary in this account and in others only appears like 5 or 6 times in Scripture. So it's a little bit of background. Jesus has just begun his ministry. Jesus has just started to collect his first disciples that will become the 12 apostles. Everybody had an expectation that the Messiah was coming, and they all believed among these disciples that Jesus was the Messiah, but they all had a wrong idea of who this Messiah would be. And Jesus begins to lay the groundwork. You're going to start to see things that are going to challenge what you believe about both the Messiah himself and also who I am as the Messiah. And that's where we are. So, very beginning of his ministry, you're in charge, you're public relations person for Jesus, and you are laying out the game plan for how he's going to unroll his ministry. And you guys decide a miracle is going to be really important because you are the Son of God. Miracles will be very important part of your ministry. So, what's the first miracle that Jesus should do? And you have a little meeting with your team of people because you want to make a recommendation to Jesus about what's the first miracle he should do. And what do you recommend in that case? What do you think should be Jesus' first miracle? Now, some of you are good students of the word. You already know what the first miracle is. Some of you don't. If you know already, set that aside and just think to yourself, if I didn't know that, what would be the first miracle that I would tell Jesus, let's go and have you do this one. Like I would think it would be something like raising somebody from the dead that we actually find much later in his ministry, or giving sight to the blind because it has such a spiritual connotation to it, or or any number of things. But I'm pretty sure that none of you would have picked this miracle. And here it is. This is the miracle, very first miracle that Jesus did. This is the miracle of turning water into wine. On the third day, they've traveled all the way, by the way, from Jerusalem in the southern part of Israel, all the way up to Galilee. Um, Again, it's about a 3 day journey. And shortly after, on the third day after they get there, a wedding took place in Cana, which is just a small little town, not far from them, maybe 4 miles away, in Galilee. And Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples also been invited to the wedding. It's almost as if these are separate invitations, that Jesus is not living with his mother. I don't know for sure, but that's the appearance. Because Jesus' mother was there, but also Jesus got an invitation to go along with his disciples. And when the wine, it says, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. She's suggesting that he do something about this. And he says, woman, why do you involve me? Now, that is not harsh. It sounds harsh in our English, but it's not. That term woman is actually a very gentle, respectful, loving term that in their day, they might just say that to their own mother, woman. It's a gentle term. So what Jesus is saying to his mother, why do you involve me, is why would we get involved in this? We are the guests. These people over there, they are the hosts. That's their responsibility. But Mary understood that the host, probably a poor family who did the best they could, but did not have enough wine for certain. I don't know what else was lacking, but certainly not enough wine for what was an all-day event or maybe even a multi-day event. Weddings were a big deal, and you were expected to have a lot of stuff to take care of your guests. Our South Asian community, I think, could totally relate to this because this is the way their weddings go. They're great big multi-day events, and that's what's going on here. And Jesus, anyway, there would have been a lot of shame involved for the host family to have run out of anything, let alone wine, so early. My hour has not yet come, and his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." In other words, my son can handle this. Let's relieve the shame that this family is feeling and take care of it. So nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing. I don't want to get into all that, but these are great big jars, 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. Now there's 6 of them. So if they are 30 gallons, it's 180 gallons. That's a lot of water that will soon be a lot of wine. So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water and it turned into wine. And he did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom, said, everyone brings out the choice, the best wine first. But here we have the best wine now instead of the cheap wine. And if their guests had too much to drink, uh, we normally bring out the cheap wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you saved the best till now. Now, let me ask you before we go on. This is going to go a little bit longer than 10 minutes today. What do you think the point of the story is? Now, if you think the point of the story is next time I'm going to party, I'm inviting Jesus, you're missing the point to the story. The focus point lesson is not about wine and wine drinking, because the scriptures have already been clear and will make clear again that drinking to the point of drunkenness is sin. Great many people struggle with it all over the world, but you are giving yourself over, the control of yourself over to something else. So just on those grounds that you basically are putting yourself in a situation where you are losing control of yourself is wrong. For the Christian, It's even more wrong because we should be giving ourselves over to the control of the Spirit of God, and we've done it with alcohol instead, if that's the case, drinking to drunkenness. So this was a surprising lesson, but it's not endorsing drinking to excess. It's just one of the unusual natures of it. So if you think that's what it is, probably not the lesson. Jesus is very clear what the lesson is that we need to learn. And it is this. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed him. When it says the disciples believed him, it doesn't mean for the first time. It means that each time they learn something new, they have the opportunity to once again believe in him. And this very first thing that they needed to learn is that Jesus is full of the glory of God because he is God's Son and God himself. That is a surprising lesson coming out of turning a bunch of water into wine, but that was the lesson that Jesus wanted to get across. I don't know if he explained it to them, but it says that they clearly understood it. They clearly understood that um, that was a very important lesson. One of the very first things to understand about Jesus, that he's full of the glory of God because he is the Son of God. He is God himself. What do we learn about Mary? After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and disciples, and he stayed for a few days. We learn a couple things about Mary in this. One, Jesus is not living with Mary at this point. He's traveling all about in his ministry. So, secondly, Joseph does not appear to be on the scene. Mary appears to be a relatively young widow at this point. If she was uh, 14, 15 years old when she gave birth to Jesus, and Jesus is now 30, you can do the math. She's 45. People didn't live as long in those days. So this would not have been a totally unusual circumstance. We don't know what happened to Joseph. We just know he no longer is ever mentioned in Scripture again after that visit to Jerusalem we looked at the other day. So most likely, Mary is a widow at this point. Jesus, her oldest son, who would normally be given the task of taking care of her, has apparently given that off to another of his half brothers to do. And he comes and for a visit with his mother for about 3 days. And then he's going to be off again. And then we're down to like four more times that Mary appears in Scripture, and that'll be it. So anyway, this one went a little bit longer, but I wanted to get as much of the story in as I could. That's our lesson both about Mary and about Jesus. One of the first things we need to understand about Jesus is that he's full of glory because he is God himself. Anyway, I hope that encourages your heart on this Friday. And Lord willing, I look forward to seeing you all on Monday.